to Alive for Good Friday. You know, when I was a kid, I always wondered, why do they call it Good Friday? Isn't that the day Jesus died? And that's true. And that's why it's called Good Friday, because of what he did for us was good. Giving his life for us 2,000 years ago on that terrible Friday, but to accomplish something wonderful and good as only he could do. And we've been in a teaching series here at Alive for the last few weeks, and we've been focusing on the last words of Jesus. And we focused on, my God, why have you forsaken me? And Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. And I am thirsty, as Jesus said, hanging on the cross. And then he says to the thief, today you will be with me in paradise. And tonight it is finished. The last words that he speaks before he gives up his spirit on the cross. If you're watching online, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. We've got candles here, and we'll be doing some things with the candles here in just a little bit in this service of shadows. You might want to get a candle at home and participate in that way as we do this. A lot of people do that, and so you could enjoy that too. But thank you for joining us, Church Online as well. Service a little different than what we typically do here. If you've been here before, you'll see that this is a bit different. If this is your first time with us, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you coming. But it's going to be a much more somber kind of a service. We really are focusing on experiencing the weight of what Jesus was going through in those last couple of days and really leaning in on the last few hours of his life and then his last words. So when we're finished tonight, we will actually depart in silence and in near darkness. You'll be able to see to get out, but the idea is we're leaving at that moment when the world was in total despair, thinking that all was lost. We can look back and know what happens next, but we want to experience the weight of what they were going through, those people that saw Jesus die at that time. So again, thank you so much for being here for our Good Friday service at Alive.
זה גופי, הניתן בעדכם, זאת עשו לזכרי. הכוס הזאת היא הברית החדשה בדמי, הנשפך בעדכם. אל יהיה כצוני, כי אם כצונך. אינני מוצא בו שום אשמה.
You may be seated. This service of shadows, as we lean into the last few hours of Jesus' life, his last words, as he finishes what he came to do and says it is finished. You might be thinking, it's service of shadows. Why is it called a service of shadows? Why the candles? Why all this? Well, it's an ancient memorial. It's an ancient practice of doing this to walk through those last few days, last few hours of Jesus' life. And the shadows is a depiction of thinking of the world step by step by step is growing darker and darker and darker as each shadow is cast across what's happening in the world, what's happening as Jesus is being crucified. So a service of shadows and culminating with that ultimate time when he gives up his life and darkness and despair for the people there. Again, we can look back and know what happens next, but tonight to feel the weight of what Jesus went through and feel the weight of those who were experiencing, watching him go through this and knew what was happening and loved him and saw this going on as we love him, and oh, how he loved us as we walk through this together and really feel the weight of what Jesus went through for us. And again, just a reminder, when we finish, we will end in darkness, near darkness, and we'll leave in silence. So as we look at these shadows, we start with one that, well, you think about, have you ever poured life into someone? Maybe as a teacher, maybe as a coach, parent, pouring life into someone, somebody at work, training someone in your position. And then to have that person, you've poured life into them, you've spent time with them, you've given up so much for them, and then just to have them completely betray you. Ever been there? Well, Jesus was there. As the first shadow we look at is the shadow of betrayal. We're reading from Matthew chapter 26. Jesus said to his disciples, "As you know, Passover begins in 2 days, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." At that same time, the leading priests and elders were meeting at the residence of Caiaphas, the high priest, plotting how to capture Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the Passover celebration, they agreed, or the people may riot. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, went to the leading priests and asked, "How much will you pay me to betray Jesus to you?" And they gave him 30 pieces of silver. From that time on, Judas began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. When it was time for the Passover meal, Jesus sat down at the table with the 12. While they were eating, he said, "I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me." Greatly distressed, each one asked in turn, "Am I the one, Lord?" He replied, "One of you who has just eaten from this bowl with me will betray me. For the Son of Man must die, as the Scriptures declared long ago. But how terrible it will be for the one who betrays him. It would be far better for that man if he had never been born." Judas, the one who would betray him, also asked, "Rabbi, am I the one?" And Jesus told him, "You have said it." The shadow of betrayal. Now that Jesus is with just the 11, Judas has gone off to do his thing. Now Jesus has these 11 that he is entrusting his ministry to, and he wants to take them out one last time and have them stand guard with him. But these are the 11 that now he knows that he's about to go to be crucified, and he is entrusting them to carry on. And you know, when you hear this part of the account in this shadow, consider we are the ones carrying that on now. If you're a follower of Jesus, we're like these 11 here. We are entrusted with his word. We're entrusted with his message, his mission to bring it to the world. So when you listen to these words, think about how the disciples there reacted to Jesus and they responded to his charge to them. And how do we respond sometimes? It's the shadow of arrest and desertion from Mark chapter 14. As they were eating, Jesus took some bread and blessed it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, "Take this and eat it, for this is my body." And he took a cup of wine and gave thanks to God for it. He gave it to them and said, "Each of you drink from it, for this is my blood, which confirms the covenant between God and his people. It is poured out as a sacrifice to forgive the sins of many. Mark my words, I will not drink wine again until the day I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." Then they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. On the way to the Mount of Olives, Jesus told his disciples, "All of you will desert me. For the scriptures say, God will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered." Peter said to him, "Even if everyone else deserts you, I never will." Jesus replied, "I tell you the truth, Peter, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." "No," Peter declared emphatically, "even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you." And all the others vowed the same. Sometimes we pick on Peter here, but all the others vowed the same. They went to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and Jesus said, "Sit here while I go and pray." He took Peter, James, and John with him, and he became deeply troubled and distressed. He told them, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." He went on a little farther and fell to the ground. He prayed that if it were possible, the awful hour awaiting him might pass him by. "Abba, Father," he cried out, "everything is possible for you. Please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Then he returned and found the disciples asleep. He said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Couldn't you watch with me even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray so that you will not give in to temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak." Then Jesus left them again and prayed the same prayer as before. When he returned to them again, he found them sleeping again, for they couldn't keep their eyes open, and they didn't know what to say. When he returned to them the 3rd time, he said, "Go ahead and sleep, have your rest. But no, the time has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Up, let's be going. Look, my betrayer is here." And immediately, even as Jesus said this, Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrived with the crowd of men armed with swords and clubs. They had been sent by the leading priests, the teachers of religious law, and the elders. The traitor, Judas, had given them a prearranged signal. "You will know which one to arrest when I greet him with a kiss." A kiss. "Then you can take him away under guard." As soon as they arrived, Judas walked up to Jesus. "Rabbi," he exclaimed, and gave him the kiss. Then the others grabbed Jesus and arrested him. Then all the disciples deserted him and ran away. Shadow of arrest and desertion. Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do? Maybe you said something, somebody took it the wrong way, or somebody accuses you of saying something you never said or did. So, "Oh, that was you that did that." "No, it wasn't me." Yeah, it was you. Ever been there? To feel that accusation against you, and you know that you're not guilty. Jesus, the one who was completely not guilty, the only one who was ever completely not guilty of anything, faces accusation now. In the shadow of accusation in Mark chapter 14. They took Jesus to the high priest's home where the leading priests, the elders, and the teachers of religious law had gathered. Meanwhile, Peter followed him at a distance and went right into the high priest's courtyard. There he sat with the guards, warming himself by the fire. Inside, the leading priests and the entire council were trying to find evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. But they couldn't find any. Many false witnesses spoke against him, but they contradicted each other. Finally, some men stood up and gave this false testimony. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days I will build another made without human hands. But even then they didn't get their story straight. Then the high priest stood up before the others and asked Jesus, well, aren't you going to answer? But Jesus was silent and made no reply. Then the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his clothing to show his horror and said, why do we need other witnesses? You have all heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict? Guilty, they cried. He deserves to die. Then some of them began to spit at him, and they blindfolded him and beat him with their fists. Prophesy to us, they jeered, and the guards slapped him as they took him away. Meanwhile, Peter was in the courtyard below. One of the servant girls who worked for the high priest came by and noticed Peter warming himself at the fire. She looked at him closely and said, you were one of those with Jesus of Nazareth, weren't you? But Peter denied it. I don't know what you're talking about. And he went out into the entryway. Just then, a rooster crowed. When the servant girl saw him standing there, she began telling the others, this man is definitely one of them. But Peter denied it again. A little later, some of the other bystanders confronted Peter and said, you must be one of them because you're from Galilee. Peter swore, a curse on me if I'm lying. I don't know this man you're talking about. And immediately the rooster crowed the second time. Suddenly, Jesus' words flashed through Peter's mind. Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny 3 times that you even know me. And he broke down and wept. Shadow of accusation. Now, it's one thing to be accused when you're innocent. It's another thing to be convicted when you know you're innocent. Jesus was innocent. And he faced now the shadow of condemnation. Condemnation from the very people he came to redeem, which includes us, by the way. From Mark chapter 15. Very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin reached a decision. They bound Jesus, led him away, and took him to Pilate, the Roman governor. Pilate asked Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus replied, you have said it. Now, it was the governor's custom each year during the Passover celebration to release one prisoner, anyone the people requested. One of the prisoners at the time was Barabbas, a revolutionary who had committed murder in an uprising. The crowd went to Pilate and asked him to release a prisoner as usual. Would you like me to release to you this king of the Jews? Pilate asked. For he realized by now that the leading priests had arrested Jesus out of envy. And even Pilate is catching on to this. But at this point, the leading priests stirred up the crowd to demand the release of Barabbas instead of Jesus. Pilate asked them, then what should I do with this man you call the king of the Jews? They shouted back, crucify him. Why? Pilate demanded. What crime has he committed? But the crowd roared even louder, crucify him. So to pacify the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He ordered Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip, then turned him over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified. The shadow of condemnation. as we move towards the last shadow, considering what Jesus is going through, he's about to give his life in these final hours, final words of Jesus. He really was betrayed. This is history. This isn't fantasy. He really was betrayed by a man in whom he had poured life. He really was deserted by a group in whom he had poured life. He really was arrested and accused and beaten and mocked and sent to be killed, crucified. The words you'll hear Jesus speak are words he spoke from the cross. As he's nailed to the cross, blood everywhere, his back ripped to shreds by the whips that they whipped him with, the crown of thorns on his head, just an awful sight. But he is still offering up his love for us in the shadow of death. This includes readings from all four Gospels. The soldiers took Jesus into the courtyard of the governor's headquarters and called out the entire regiment. They dressed him in a purple robe, and they wove thorn branches into a crown and put it on his head. Then they saluted him and taunted, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him on the head with a reed stick, spit on him, and dropped to their knees in mock worship. When they were finally tired of mocking him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him again. Then they led him away to be crucified. Two others, both criminals, were led out to be executed with him. When they came to a place called the Skull, they nailed him to the cross, and the criminals were also crucified, one on his right and one on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing." And the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. One of the criminals hanging beside him scoffed, "So you're the Messiah, are you? Prove it by saving yourself and us too while you're at it." But the other criminal protested, "Don't you fear God, even when you have been sentenced to die? We deserve to die for our crimes, but this man hasn't done anything wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied, "I assure you, today you will be with me in paradise." By this time it was about noon, and darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. The light from the sun was gone. At about 3 o'clock, Jesus called out with a loud voice, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Suddenly the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn down the middle. Then Jesus shouted, "Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands." Jesus knew that his mission was now finished. And to fulfill Scripture, he said, "I am thirsty." A jar of sour wine was sitting there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put it on a hyssop branch, and held it up to his lips. When Jesus had tasted it, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.